Welcome to the reproductive system. Now, this is completely different to any other system that we have studied because in men and women the reproductive organs will differ. So men, they include the prostate gland, the testes, testicular vessels, the penis and the scrotum, and in women they include the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the cervix, the vagina and the labia. Now both are protected by the pelvic girdle, and in women the pelvic girdle is slightly wider and this helps with childbirth. So let's start then by looking at the male reproductive system. Starting off with the prostate gland. It's a small gland situated between the bladder and the rectum, and it surrounds the beginning of the urethra. The prostate's position is at the start of the urethra, and it's important because it produces two secretions carried in semen. One secretion will help keep the lining of the urethra moist, and the other is part of the seminal fluids, which helps semen to travel along the urethra and into the female. So moving on to the testes then, these are the male gonads or glands, and the testes are two glands which are contained within a sac of skin called the scrotum. They develop in the abdomen before descending into the scrotum just before birth. The testes produce spermatoza, which is known as sperm, and the male sex hormone testosterone, which is responsible for male sexual characteristics. Spermatoza develops in the testes and are stored there because they must be kept at a lower temperature than the average body temperature. The testicular vessels then, we have two. You have the epididymis and the vas deferens. These are two tubes which form the passageway from the testes to the urethra. So starting off with the epididymis, it's a tightly coiled tube. It opens from the top of each testes and continues down along the side of the gland and straightens out into the vas deferens. Now the function of the epididymis is to store and transport sperm as well as acting as a site where immature sperm can develop. Moving on to the vas deferens then, it's a duct with muscular walls leading from the epididymis to the urethra. The function is that it acts as a passageway for the transfer of sperm from the storage site of the epididymis to the prostatic urethra and eventually to the penis. This occurs during sexual activity because it contracts its muscular walls and pushes the sperm forward. Now the scrotum, you have the external sex organs. It's a sac which contains the testes, the epididymis and the vas deferens, and it hangs behind the penis. It's made of an outer layer of skin and an inner layer of muscle. A membrane divides it into two halves, one for each testes. The function of the scrotum is to support and protect the testes as well as maintain the correct body temperature. It's kept outside the body in order to keep them cool. However, if the body temperature has dropped, it reacts by contracting its muscular walls, moving itself and the testes closer to the body, raising the temperature of the glands. If the temperature is too high, the muscles relax, moving the scrotum and testes away from the body, lowering the temperature. Now, the penis is the main sexual organ, and it's the external part of the reproductive system in the male. And it has three important parts: erectile tissue, the foreskin, and the urethra. Now the penis consists of three bodies of spongy erectile tissue, all running lengthways. Two of these run side by side above the urethra and a tube that runs through the centre of the penis and acts as a duct for urine and semen. The third lies underneath them, forming a tube containing the urethra which becomes the tip of the penis, known as the glands. This tissue is full of blood vessels, and surrounding the glands is the foreskin, which is a loose double fold of skin which protects the glands, and the foreskin is sometimes removed either to prevent infection or for religious reasons. The function of a penis is that it has a double role. It's the organ of excretion because it carries urine from the bladder, or it's also for the organ for reproduction. So during sexual activity the penis becomes erect. The erection is caused by an increase in the amount of blood circulating in the vessels of the spongy tissues. These tissues then swell, causing the penis to enlarge. Eventually the tissues will become rigid, which allows penetration into the vagina of the female and delivery of the semen during intercourse. So looking at sperm in more detail then, it looks like a microscopic tadpole. Each one will consist of a head, a middle section and a tail. The head is a nucleus that contains 23 chromosomes, where the tail is a projection resembling a thread, and this moves backwards and forwards and enabling the sperm to swim to the destination. The sperm fertilises the ova, which is a female egg, and the head of the sperm carries the important genetic information to form the chromosomes. It inserts itself into the ovum, and the tail, which is no longer needed, will just break down. Although semen contains millions of sperm, only one is needed to fertilise the ovum. Once fertilised, the ovum will grow and develop into a baby. Now let's look at the female reproductive system. This system is hidden inside the body, apart from the entrance of the vagina. Just like the male system, the organs are protected by the pelvic girdle, and remember the pelvic girdle is slightly wider in the female, allowing room for the passage of a baby. So starting off with the uterus then, it's the centre of the female reproductive system, and it's also known as the womb. It's here that fertilised ovum will grow into a baby. The top end opens out into the fallopian tubes, and the bottom end, or cervix, opens into the vagina and forms the birth canal. Now, the uterus is a muscular hollow organ that sits at the right angle of the vagina and connects to the fallopian tubes. It's around about 7.5 centimetres long and looks like an upside down pear, and it's around 5 centimetres wide. This will expand during pregnancy, which will accommodate the fetus. The lining of the uterus consists of layers of tissues, and these respond to hormonal secretions. These layers will thicken every month to act as a nourishing bed for the fertilised ovum. The cervix is a narrow neck to the uterus which opens into the vagina. It's the width of a pencil lead, but during childbirth it will dilate to allow the passageway of the baby. Now, the function of the cervix is to form the first part of the birth canal. Now, the dilation of the cervix is a measurement used to determine how quickly childbirth is progressing. So looking at the ovaries now, these are glands, and they're approximately the size and shape of an almond. They're positioned either side of the uterus below the fallopian tubes. They secrete the hormones responsible for the female sexual characteristics, and unlike sperm, an ovum exists in the body at birth, but in immature and undeveloped form in the known as follicles. After puberty, one of these follicles will develop and rupture, releasing an ovum every month. So a follicle then, in more detail, is a small structure on the surface of the ovary known as a graphene follicle. As they mature, they contain fluid and an egg or an ovum. As soon as this ovum is mature and ready to be fertilised, the follicle will split, releasing the ovum, which will travel along the fallopian tube to the uterus. So looking at the fallopian tube then, these are funnel-shaped tubes which start at the top of the uterus and continue along to the ovaries. They are named after an Italian anatomist who discovered them. The role of the fallopian tube is a passageway. It's from the ovaries to the uterus for the ovum, as well as the site of fertilisation. Now, sperm swim up these tubes to reach the ovum. So looking at the vagina then, it's a muscular passageway leading from the cervix to the vulva. It connects the internal sex organs with those on the outside of the body. During sexual activity, the blood vessels in the vagina walls fill with blood, causing them to swell and become engorged. The vagina connects the cervix to the vulva and thus outside to the body, serving a passageway for menstrual blood, and it forms part of the birth canal during labour and is the site of penetration during intercourse. So looking at the vulva, it's an external organs of the female reproductive system, and they include the mons pubis, the labia majora and minora, and the clitoris. Moving on to the breasts now, these are an accessory organ to the reproductive system, and they're not directly involved in the process of reproduction. They develop during pregnancy, ready for the function as milk-secreting glands. The breasts are glands which sit on the front of the chest, and the size will vary. Each breast is circular and convex with a central raised nipple, and they consist of adipose and areolar tissue supported by fascia. The tissue forms lobes subdivided into lobules which opens into several ducts. These ducts open on the surface of the nipple, and during pregnancy the lobules develop and produce milk. Hormones cause the breast to grow during pregnancy and puberty and activate the secretion of milk during pregnancy. Now let's look at pregnancy in more detail. There are 6 main stages: fertilisation, post-fertilisation, cell division, formation of the embryo, development of the fetus, and the birth. So fertilisation, post-ovulum, is when the ovum enters the fallopian tubes in the direction of the uterus. It reaches the centre of the tube in 30 minutes. If sperm have been deposited in the vagina within 24 hours, there is a 3-day window in which fertilisation may occur. Several hundred of sperm will have swum through the uterus and into the fallopian tubes to search for an ovum. Only 1 sperm is needed to fertilise. The sperm penetrates the ovum's membrane and enters the ovum. This is called fertilisation. So in post-fertilisation, the tail of the sperm breaks down and its head or nucleus grows. The nucleus of the sperm and the nucleus of the ovum fuse to make a single nucleus. In cell division, once the zygote has formed, it undergoes a process of mitotic cell division, dividing into 2, then 4, then 8 cells, until a ball of cells called a morula. After 5 days, this turns into a blastocyst, which enters the uterus and implants in the endometrium of the uterus on the 7th day. The formation of the embryo by day 24 has formed into an amniotic cavity, containing an embryo that looks like a seahorse. The endometrium and part of the blastocyst mesh and develop into a placenta, which is the baby's support system. The development of the fetus. So the embryo is known as the fetus from 8 weeks, and it develops in the amniotic cavity. The fluid protects the baby from shocks and pressure. Now, just before birth, the membrane of the amniotic cavity breaks and the amniotic fluid is released via the vagina. Childbirth usually occurs in the 40th week after fertilisation. You will be researching and studying the disease and disorder of the reproductive system.